1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, there it is. There it is. There's the opening. There it is. There's the beginning of the show. Good day, evening, morning, all of that kind of stuff. This is a special, I don't know, holiday Monday, Canadian Harvest Thanksgiving episode. Because they still do call it Thanksgiving. It's a little presumptuous if you ask me, but, I didn't name the country. I don't make the rules. I just sit here and abide by them and make sure that I don't get shipped off to another country for doing silly things. So, hope you all have had a great weekend. If you are in the States and you don't have the day off, I'm sorry to hear that. Pretty much sucks for you, but you guys will have some holidays coming up that we, living up here in Canuckisville, do not have those days off. So I guess we'll take advantage of them while we can. Although I do feel, and I've said this many times, I do feel like that we should be able to. Why is it that we're forced to take off all of the Christian holidays from work, but not the Jewish ones? Which would you rather have? 2 days off for Christmas or 7 days off for Hanukkah? Right? Do you take off Yom Kippur? I don't know. Anyways, so I don't know what you guys did for your Thanksgiving in Canada. The usual. I think it's pretty much Thanksgiving dinner is like a universal thing. This seems to be in Canada and the United States, anyways. Right? It's turkey. Mashed potatoes. If you're in the States, it's a sweet potato casserole with like marshmallows on top. Or we always would have it. And when I first moved to Canada and talking to people, they were like, "You eat what?" I was like, "Yeah, you make a sweet potato casserole and you put marshmallows on the top of it and toss that into the oven." But you go one step further. My mom used to go one step further, and she'd get a handful of cinnamon hearts, the candy, the cinnamon heart candy, and she would toss those in with the sweet potatoes. It's basically a pot of, or like a casserole dish of diabetes, right? By the time it's said and done. But oh so good. Just make sure that you don't bite into that first bite of molten lava marshmallow, right? And fry the roof of your mouth like it's a slice of pizza at 3 a.m. and you've just left the bar, of which we've all done that. Tiff, you're right. My mom is a badass. All 5'5", 120 pounds with, 82 pounds of bricks in her fucking pocket. Redheaded German. Her big threat to me was always, because she could never, I'm 6'4". She's 5 foot fuck all. But she would always say to me, she'd be like, "Don't think that you're not too tall. I will stand on a chair with a baseball bat and take you out at the knees." Now the message was kind of mixed a little bit there, because if she was standing on the chair, she wouldn't have taken me out at the knees. But I understood the sentiment, and that was the end of that. One thing I will say is that if it wasn't for my mom, Thanksgiving dinners, and any dinners for that matter, would probably be hot fucking garbage. My mom's the one that taught me how to make things like, hot German potato salad. It's fantastic stuff. Tempura was always a thing. She would have to get us to, that's how she would trick us into eating vegetables as kids. It was like, she'd not in a full blown like fish batter, right? But like a light tempura batter. The only thing she could never get us to do was eat eggplant, because no eggplant goes in this mouth ever. Just not a thing. But I can remember we would always have the traditional way too big turkey, the sweet potatoes, the gravy, the, corn, the homemade rolls, all of that stuff. It was a big to-do, I always preferred it more when I was at my grandparents' place, because then it was, most of the time we'd barbecue because the weather's nice, right? We live in Washington State around Thanksgiving time, which is traditionally the correct time in November, after Halloween. Okay. And it was always your traditional turkey dinners. Now the weather, already in Canada is like that. So I can understand it's that fall harvest, of which I harvested. Absolutely did my part in harvesting. And now they are hanging and drying nicely. So we'll see how that goes in a couple of weeks. But we would always have, these traditional Thanksgiving dinners. And as I got older, and you realize how much turkey through the year you actually eat. So having turkey on a fucking Thanksgiving dinner is, to me, right? Straight up, okay, I'll do it, but throw on a brisket, throw on some ribs. Hell, make tacos. Because there's one thing that they don't do, is have a Thanksgiving turkey feast in Mexico. So that brings me to a story about when I was a child and we were still living in California. And if you go back on any of the previous TID Talk episodes, you'll listen to some of the stories about when I was a child, very young. We would travel a lot more. I don't know if it's because we were on the run or we just like to be nomads. Maybe a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I don't know. But one time we ended up in Mexico. And my mom always tells me this story. We'd end up in Mexico and it was Thanksgiving. We wanted to have a Thanksgiving meal. I don't remember what city we were in, Tijuana, Ensenada, one of the border towns, right, that we would travel to. And my mother, not proficient in Spanish. She knows, a few words, but not her first language, not her second language. I'm pretty sure she speaks more German than she does Spanish. So we're there at a restaurant and she's trying to order a Thanksgiving meal. At which point the waiter's like, okay. And she says, a turkey. You guys have turkey. El pollo grande. Bok, bok, bok. So now she's offending the people at the restaurant, I'm sure. I mean, they do have words for turkey, but just to say that you're looking for a giant chicken that sounds like a duck, I don't know if that's going to get you a Thanksgiving meal in a country where they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to another country on holidays. It can be a trip. it can be a real trip sometimes to see what some of the other traditions are, what some of the other, things that they do on those holidays. I know in the States when you're a kid, you wake up on Thanksgiving and you go out as the family starts to show up, you throw the football around like, well, while you got the games on, you're watching football, and traditionally you're watching the Detroit Lions lose. That's how you know it's Thanksgiving in the United States, because the Lions are losing a game. I don't know if that's going to be a thing this year or not. They are looking fantastic. Shout out to Motor City Dan and what he's done to that team. But, you would always have this, and then you would always start drinking way too early, right? Because if football starts that early in the morning, if you're on the West Coast, then you start way earlier than you should. And if you're on the East Coast, then, well, it's noon, so you might as well start drinking. And it's Thanksgiving, and you've got the day off tomorrow, right? So you're Thanksgiving Sunday, you've got the Monday off, and you start drinking. Sometimes that can be more problematic than it's worth. I can remember one time in Canada. One time I met a girlfriend of mine's house for Thanksgiving. And she had an uncle, a stepdad that didn't exactly, see eye to eye so much. Well, whenever they were together, they would always get into some kind of a argument. And I'm telling you straight up, there is absolutely nothing that takes the air out of the room and the festivities and just puts everything on a halt when you've got a couple of family members that don't see eye to eye during the holiday season, and especially during that get together. It just makes things weird, awkward. And if you're not part of the family, like if you're like the outsider of the family, then it gets even weirder. So I can remember this time we were there for dinner. The two of them get into this, kind of a argument. I don't even know what it was about. The uncle goes to leave, goes outside for a cigarette. Well, I go outside for a cigarette, smoke a couple minutes later. This is when I still smoke cigarettes. I know, weird, right? I can't even imagine smoking cigarettes now. Smoke a lot more cannabis, but I can't imagine smoking cigarettes. But at the time I didn't, so I'm outside and I'm having a smoke, and he's muttering to himself, and we're kind of having that. I'm over here on one side of the yard, and he's over here on the other side of the yard, and we're kind of having that. We're not having a conversation, but he's saying stuff and trying to accept, get my acknowledgement on it. And you're like, yeah, because I'm not getting involved in it. And then at the same time, he starts saying something about his niece, right? Girl I was dating at the time. Now all of a sudden I do have to get involved in the conversation, because I'm like, why would you say something like that? That's rude, ignorant, and I'll fucking do that. And so then he starts with the obligatory, oh, what? So you're against me now too? And it's like, no, nobody's against you, right? Nobody wants to fight you. This isn't what we're here for. I don't understand why you're, being so ignorant. But he showed up half cut. It was, 2:00 in the afternoon at this point, not even close to dinner time. He's already half in the bag, and he wasn't like he was drinking, cheap shit either. He's got the Johnny Walker out, right? Special holiday, and he's feeling like giving her. And so he gets up and he's like, everybody's against me. And I don't know why you're not even part of this family and you're against me. And I should just kick your ass right out of here. You have no reason to be. He starts getting this belligerent kind of stuff. And I'm like, you don't want to do that. There's in no way, shape, or form going to end well for you. You don't want to do that. I'm trying to talk him down. And he's standing like in my space. Eventually, I'm like, dude, we're not doing this. You try to walk away, and he stands up in your space again. And And at this point, the girlfriend comes out, and the girlfriend's mother and stepdad, everybody comes outside. Here I am. I'm like, I don't even know what to think. What, like, do I leave? Do I stick around? What's happening here? And then he pulls out the old finger poke of doom and starts like tapping it into my chest, right? Telling me what I shouldn't be doing and what I should be doing. And I'm just a lowlife and I'll never do anything. And you don't even have a real job. You're just a piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what the fuck? And finally I'd had enough. And I just kind of give him a little stiff arm with the old right arm, just kind of toss him back. And he goes flying back. And as he goes flying back and kind of falls off the edge of the deck of the patio, the back patio there. And you can see him stumbling, and he's trying to catch himself, but he's way too inebriated already, right? Should have probably be taking a nap before dinner. And he's stumbling. He's doing almost this backwards running thing. It's like he's moonwalking like a white guy across the grass. And all of a sudden, his feet stop, but his body keeps going. And fall back he did. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, shit, did he hit his head on a rock or something? No, that didn't happen. Oh, did he twist an ankle or break a leg or something? No, that didn't happen either. It was much, much better than that. The fact that the girlfriend at the time's parents had a giant dog, and the giant dog had taken a giant-sized shit in the backyard that hadn't been cleaned up yet. And sure enough, this dumbass stumbled, tripped, fell backwards onto this thing, basically took a back bump onto this giant pile of shit that landed on the back of his head and in his ear. Like that whole turned, and then it got into his ear and everything like that. So you'd say to yourself, what do you do? Do you laugh? Do you go to help him up? Because this just made him even more mad, more embarrassed, more pissed off. All of the emotions were coming to the surface at this point. At which point I was escorted by the mother back into the house. And, well, he had to leave the party. Basically had to turn on a hose, water his entire head down, which the man of the house, the stepdad, loved that because the water was still cold as hell, right? Ain't no warm water going through that hose. Literally had to spray his head down. And then, of course, he got into a cab and had to go home. At which point, for about 10 minutes, the girlfriend of the time was extremely mad at me, for this happening in the first place, because somehow it's my fault. Probably a reason we weren't together very long after that. Uppity broads. But the stepfather, I was over like Rover with a 4-leaf clover kind of over, right? Like there was nothing I could do wrong that day. The good booze came out after dinner, the accolades, because they didn't like each other anyways. And I didn't do anything. I just gave the guy like get out of my face thing, right? The mother was indifferent about the whole thing. So I'm saying things could be bad, things could be worse. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to get into a fight, with your family. It's definitely not something that I do with mine, especially on my mother's side of the family. On my dad's side of the family, gives a shit. They're all gone. I'm the last one. Who cares? I just be beating myself up as opposed to off. My mother's side of the family, you don't want to do that. My mom being the smallest one at, 5.5 feet tall, but she is also the oldest one. It's like I always refer to her as the first pancake of the batch. That first one that gets tossed in, that's a little bit more non-refined, a little bit crustier, a little bit shrunken up. It's not as big and fluffy as the rest of them in the batch, but it's the most experienced and best tasting one. I don't even know what that last fucking part means. But that's the rest of my family. The girls are all 6 foot tall. The guys are all 6 foot tall. They're all, my uncle is a cop, right, for Las Vegas Metro Police Department, and then later the sheriff's department before he retired completely. So it wasn't like you wanted to get into anything with them, at a family function, right? But getting into it with somebody else's family, I mean, I guess that's completely acceptable. So I don't recommend it, but nonetheless, it happens. And then there was always a thing, like I would always find myself working holidays in Canada because I didn't have family that I would go to, right? At the time I couldn't just leave the country and go back to Nevada. Remember, I was asked nicely to not be there and needed to wait out at least, 7 years of time for those kinds of things to go away because of statutes. So I'd found myself, whenever I was working, I'd be working security jobs, private bodyguarding jobs, or even door jobs, right? For when those were open. We would always work the holidays. We'd always work the, Thanksgiving, if it was open, or if there was an event that needed to be done, or, the festivals, or Christmas time. Christmas time in Canada, everything is closed. But one thing that they did, this club that was open, this club called Whiskey Saigon, ran the door at that club for about 13 years. And every Christmas they would have this event where the Jewish community would come out and rent the entire club out. And they do these things they'd call them the Matzah Ball. I know, very innovative in the name, the Matzah Ball. And it was a Christmas Day event, right? Because, I mean, you could pretty much rent out a club, right, and have it for yourselves and be pretty sure that there is not going to be any Catholics, Protestants, Presbyterians, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Anglicans, Philadelphians. Who am I missing? Southern Baptists? No, none of them. No Christians, all Jewish people. And it basically was just a giant hookup spot. So we'd work these clubs, these events on Christmas Day, right? And they'd be packed. We're talking 1,000 young, like early 20s, nothing better to do, I mean, 19 is the drinking age. So you're talking from, 19 to early 40s, right? Those older, but still living that young life, 40-year-olds, where you haven't quite adapted to the later lifestyle. They'd all come out to these clubs, 1,000 of them, and just hitting on each other. It was like a Jewish Caligula going on in these clubs. It's crazy. And heaven forbid you should ever try to enforce any of the regular rules and regulations on, the typical Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights that you were open for the rest of the year. When it was just a mishmash of everybody. No. They felt like if you rented out the entire club, well, then that was yours to do with as you please. Some of them found out very quickly that is not the case. You can still get thrown out on Christmas if you've rented out the club. One year, we actually had to, there was an incident up on one of the floors of the club. And I get a call, and we go up there and it's a guy harassing a girl beyond the point where she wanted to be harassed. I don't get her twisted. You went to the club on the special event. It's been going on for years. You knew exactly like what the vibe of the club was, but that doesn't make it acceptable, right? To get harassed, to get berated, to get, put into bad situations. You're there to have a good time too. Nobody went there to thinking to themselves, oh, I'm such a morose individual that I need to go to this place to get beat up for myself so that it makes my therapy sessions through the week seem that much more, worthwhile. No, nothing like that at all. So you would go to these things and you would go there under the premise that you're going to have a good time, but you're not going to get, berated and have to worry about when you go home because somebody of the non-Jewish persuasion was hitting on you all night long. You don't have to worry about those kinds of, throwing up air quotes, consequences when you got home from your mother or your father, right? It was an entire Jewish community other than the people that ran the club and worked there. So we get a call. And we go upstairs. We go to get it onto the floor, and this girl tells us the story about how this guy, basically, she's up against the bar. He turns her around. He's like pressing right up onto her and then reaches down and grabs a handful of her business right at the bar. Well, that's assault. That's not even just like, what do you mean you won't go out with me, you fucking pig, right? That's straight up assault. So she points the guy out and go over to talk to the guy. I'm like, I need you to come downstairs so I can talk to you. It's way too loud up here. Come downstairs, come down the front door. Let's have a little conversation where it's a little quieter. He says, fine. He comes downstairs. We're walking down there, and it's always, those moments. It's like it's like when you watch a movie and you see, we're going to need you to come down to the station. And you can ride with us. And then, all the next scene is they're at the station and they start the conversation. Basically, that tells me in the movie that you're telling me there was absolutely zero conversation in that car ride. You could have saved yourselves a whole lot of fucking time if you just had the conversation in the car ride on the way over there. Nobody talks in these police cars on the way to the station for questioning. Stupid assholes. But this was one of those things because you're in a club and you're going down and it's just loud as hell. Even down the stairwells, you get out to the front door with this guy. And I said, why don't you tell me what happened? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, don't bother with the what are you talking about? That wasn't me thing. We're beyond that. The bartender pointed you out. The girl pointed you out. Multiple people have pointed you out, and I want to hear your side of the story. And he starts telling me, he's like, we were talking, we were having a great time. I thought she was hitting on me. I decided to put a move on her, the typical story. And then all of a sudden, as soon as I grabbed a handful of knish, she's out of the picture. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Okay. So you've just told me that you felt it was acceptable to basically assault somebody inside of my establishment. So for that reason, we're going to tell you, have a good night. Not going back into the club. I'm going to go home. Have a good night. Merry Christmas. At which point he decides to freak out because he was the head guy who had rented out the club. So now this put me into a weird position because the owner happened to be coming by, right? At the same exact time, I'm telling this guy, you got to go home. And he's yelling and screaming out on the sidewalk as the owner comes walking up, and the owner's like, what is going on here? And I pull him aside and I tell him what happened. And the guy's like, I rented this entire club. He's yelling, and one of my other guys is trying to keep him quiet, and he's yelling at the owner, at which point the owner looks over at him and goes, you assaulted somebody in the club. get the fuck out of here. I don't care about you renting the club. We can shut the entire thing down if you want. Like, he basically went off on this guy and told him, your money doesn't mean shit because I've already gotten your money. You're not spending any more of it in here. So fuck off. Because we had to give them like a roll of drink tickets as well. And it was just, the entitlement when you rent something out, or when you lease something out, or when you feel like you're owed something because you just showed up there, right? It was always a weird flex. It was always a weird flex, especially at a club where bad things could happen very easily. Just add alcohol. It happens all the fucking time. And then I started getting out of that kind of line of work, and I was doing, one of the things that I've talked about on one of the previous shows was I was working at the door, and then I was decided to do a online radio show. And there's always beefs with wrestling and wrestling shows and stuff. There was another show out of the States that we had a beef with, a show called And Justice for Brawl that was on when I was doing The Law, right? All these names of these wrestling shows that were showing up, and we were the only two, and we showed up, we did ours first, and then they came out and did theirs, and then tried to get heat on us with calling into our show and trying to cut promos, and then we would call their show back and cut promos, and none of this was planned. It was just like, okay, this was renegade radio stuff. This was like, when you would beef with other radio shows and you would call them up unannounced and try to fuck with their show. Nowadays you do that on stations and on YouTube channels, and you fuck with somebody's show, but people have taken it far too far because there's the visual aspect with doing it here. There was never a visual aspect that could get you in any kind of trouble other than swearing back then on radio. But again, you weren't on regular terrestrial radio. You were on a satellite or internet type station. So if you dropped a bunch of, F-bombs, anything south of like racist stuff, which I'm sure there was a lot more of it back then as well too, because, the social awareness was not what it is now back then. Right? The social awareness of where we are as a society now and where we should be as a society is way different now than it was prior to the year 2000. Even in the early 2000s, it was still a little whatever. But prior to that, it was, you were still looking over your shoulder before you told a off-color joke. You were still making sure that in the right crowds, you wouldn't say things, right? But the ability to say this stuff to somebody on their show was completely okay. So there was a lot of promos that were being cut there. And then that led me to the next phase of my life, which was becoming a professional wrestler. And now this is where these shows and these TID Talks are going to really kind of delve into some of the ridiculousness, some of the stupidity, some of the asinine behavior that goes along with getting into the world of professional wrestling for myself, not for everybody, but for myself and my story alone. So before everybody starts pitching a bitch, right, and getting all fucking uppity at me, okay? If anybody's got something to say about my stories going forward, you can contact me directly. You won't, because one thing that I do know over the course of 26, plus years, 25, 26 plus years of professional wrestling, one thing I do know is that 90% of the people in the business are pussies. It's a very small amount of people that will ever actually speak to you like a man, like an adult, and mean what they say and mean what their actions are. Okay. But we'll get into all of that stuff as those stories come out. Now, I want to remember getting into the world of professional wrestling, and I remember, when I started training in professional wrestling, I'm very happy to, unfortunately, wow, that was a skip. I'm very happy for the trainers that I had. Unfortunately, some of them have passed. Some of them have died. Everybody has people that you credit, for your training in the world of professional wrestling. And for me, for what you learn business-wise, what you learn psychology-wise, what you learn toughness-wise, you can credit a couple of trainers or one trainer or multiple trainers. As far as learning the business goes, that's really something that professional wrestlers, much like rock stars, learn on the go. You learn it by getting out on the road. You learn it by putting on your boots and traveling. You learn it by being in locker rooms or being in dressing rooms with other people that are doing the same stuff as you are. You learn it by sharing stories. You learn it by going out there and doing the do. You learn it by fucking up a lot. You learn it by making bad mistakes. You learn it by making good choices. But you don't learn it all by staying into one place. So who you credit for your training and for making you prepared to go out there is one thing. Once you're out there is really where the learning begins. And every once in a while, you've got to go home and you've got to say to your trainers, hey, this is what happened to me on the road. Did I handle this the right way? Preferably, because the word will always get back to your trainers if you handled it the wrong way. The guys that I credit for this are old-timer Waldo Von Erich, right? Walter Siebert is his real name. And he did a Von Erich gimmick. He did a Waldo Von Erich gimmick, and he'll always tell you before he passed, he'll always tell you, sit you down and tell you the story about how he, wrestled for 37 days. It's like multiple hours, a 4-hour match or something like that with Bruno Sammartino in Madison Square Garden. One of the longest matches ever in the history of professional wrestling. And that was his big story that he was always telling you, right? It's fantastic. You could listen to the story all the time because you had no choice. You weren't going anywhere. And he was a guy, because I had such great respect for the old style, prior to kayfabe being dead in the business, back when, everybody and their mother, all thought it was real. You talk to people now and, even then there's like, oh yeah, what do you do? Oh, I'm a professional wrestler. Oh, my father loved professional wrestling, or my grandmother, and you couldn't, there's no way they would ever believe. They would yell at the TV, and there's no way if you were to tell them that it was fake, they wouldn't believe you. They'd argue with you right now, even though you're in the business, and try to tell you that it was real. And, so Waldo had this, he came from that era, right? And so I always said to myself is I don't have to make you believe that the wrestling business is real. That's not my job. I just have to make you believe that what I do is real. I can't be a magician for everybody. I can only be a magician for myself, right? And the other man that I credit is one Johnny Canine. Johnny Canine, you can look up some of the stories about him. Johnny was a reputed biker, member of one of the larger motorcycle affiliated clubs in North America. Also had himself a couple of fantastic stories. He was super huge over with one Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, right? Territory stuff. But his bigger claims to fame were the fact that through his shoot life, that means his real life, right? Is not his work life, but his shoot life, what goes on out in the real world. He was a notorious bad guy and ended up, in court for trying to allegedly murder somebody. And in the course of that, allegedly, may or may not have fired a rocket launcher through the door of the prosecuting attorney and, then gone after the judge as well. So Johnny did quite some time in prison. He got released. One of the reasons, may or may not have been, allegedly, that Johnny may or may not have compromised stories and leads to officials for some of his extracurricular activities. Now, in doing so, he was kind of extradited out of the area, right? Excommunicated, so to speak, from everything. Found himself a new life out on the West Coast, where he was, doing some extra work later on in his life, doing some acting stuff, right? Getting into some movies, because Johnny was as wide as he was tall. Tough dude, no doubt about it, right? And then came back one time to Ontario in Canada, and that was where he met his demise. I personally think, I may be right or wrong on this, I don't know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but that he was told to not come back. He came back, and in doing so was basically a slap in the face to the people that told him not to come back. And they may or may not have taken care of it. I can remember one of the first days I met Johnny. He always wanted to test your toughness. Always wanted to see if you were, if you were tough enough to take a real fight in the world of professional wrestling, because this was also a guy who came from the time and era where it wasn't 115-pound, athletic, flippy, acrobatic, gymnastic guys like you see in a lot of wrestling now. It wasn't a bunch of 170-pound dudes. It was like guys that were 230 to 280 to 300 plus pounds, big D-ball guts and giant shoulders. I mean, hi. But it was men. It was, you know what I mean? That definition of men. When I was a kid, you'd always watch wrestlers and you'd be like, oh my God, these old men, these guys that are like in their 40s and 50s out there. And then you find out that they're still in their 20s and 30s. They just look that way because they were hardened men, right? He came from that era. So if you were going to survive in his business, you had to be tough. You had to be able to take a shot, so to speak. One of the first things upon meeting him, and him knowing that I wanted to get into this, was he was going to chin check me. And that's exactly what he did. We're talking. He's like, so you want to get into the world of professional wrestling, huh? I'm like, it's the plan. He goes, you think you're tough? I'm like, I don't. And before he could even ask the next question, boom, punch in the jaw. Now, not like a fucking full-blown haymaker that he was trying to murder me, but just straight jab to the jaw with a bare knuckle. And that made me mad, and I wanted to murder him. But I kind of knew what he was doing at the same time. And this wouldn't be the first time. No, it wouldn't be the last time, I should say. It was the first time. Stupid. Whew. I may or may not be high. Definitely high. It wouldn't be the last time. I can remember one of the first matches that I ever did. And I'm out there working in this match. And it was on a show that had like Johnny was on the show and Greg the Hammer Valentine was on the show. And, I think that like Link, the missing Link might have been on, Dewey Robertson might have been on the show. Some of these other guys, right? And Duke the Dumpster Droese was on the show. So I'm out doing my match. It's one of the first matches, and it's the drizzling shits. Like I had no business even being in the fucking ring, I think, at that point. And I probably should have just burned my boots right there, turned around, walked away, and never done anything else in my life. But I didn't. But at one point, I'm about halfway through this thing, and it's garbage. It's just straight up hot garbage. And through the curtain, come walking down to the ring, is Duke the Dumpster Droese. Everybody kind of stops and I don't know what to fucking do here, right? So he gets up onto the ring apron and he hops up and he says to me, he goes, "Come here." And I walk over to him at the edge of the apron and he grabs me and he hauls off and pulls all the way back and just fucking slaps me right upside the melon. Like open palm, like I owed this guy money or something. Slaps me across the face. Now, thankfully, I have a very thick neck and large cranium, so I just took it. And he says to me, "Finish this fucking match right now." Well, what do? Here's one of the seniors out there. You know what I mean? This is a guy who's, I don't care if he was number 501 on the PWI 500, if this entire thing was set up to, as I can take the worst guy in the world and make him a professional wrestler, which was what Vince McMahon did with the Duke the Dumpster Droese gimmick. To me, I am a fucking plebe. I'm a nobody. I am a scumbag, the bottom of a shoe idiot in the world of the professional wrestling. And so you don't talk back. You don't say anything. You just like, what the fuck? And you do what you're told. So that's exactly what I did. I finished the match instantly. Boom, right there. Ended it. And I go walking back to the back and I'm mad. I'm mad because I'm still a man. You know what I mean? I still have feelings. I still can feel disrespected. Right? And I'm confused. I'm angry and I'm confused at this time. So I go walking back through the curtain and I make my way over to where guys are getting changed and stuff like that. And I see Droese, I see him, and I'm like, I got questions. Like, what the fuck? Right? Like, I'm angry and I want to fight you. But I'm probably going to get beat up by all of these old timers if I try to do anything. And I'm never going to be able to get anywhere in this business if I try to lip off and stick up for myself, so to speak, right, to a vet. So I say to him, I'm like, what was that all about? Like, asking the question, why did you do that? What did I do wrong? And he's just laughing. And that's just making me angry. And he can see that I'm getting angry. And I'm like, I really want to fight you. And he's like, "Kid, it wasn't me. He put me up to it." And he totally sells out and stooges out Johnny Cana. Throws him right under the bus. And now at this point, I know for a fact, because the guys are they're laughing. We fucking got one over on this stupid young green kid, right? Who, rightfully so, shouldn't have been out there. But they were having fun popping themselves. And it later come to find out this is a thing. This is a thing that happens inside of the wrestling industry is that, a lot of the time you're just trying to pop the boys in the back. It's not necessarily the best business practice, but God damn it, it's fun on some of these, mud shows when there's not many people out there and you're just like, fuck it, let's just go have a good time and get paid. So he's saying this and he's looking at, Johnny, and Johnny's just laughing his ass off like, "Kid, that was the drizzling shits. You shouldn't have been out there. What the fuck were you thinking?" Right? And I'm like, You're right. I'll get you back one day. I'll get you back one day. I never did. But in my head, I always wanted to get him back for that. And that was one of the first lessons in professional wrestling that I would learn, that I knew would carry over for the rest of my existence, the rest of my wrestling career. And it was always something that, you know, I can always go back and credit Johnny Canine and Duke the Dumpster Droese. Now, there was a third person involved in this circle, in this triad of silliness. Now, that was the gentleman who owned the school where we were training. That was a gentleman, like, if you know anything about really horrible human beings inside of the world of professional wrestling, in Canada especially, then you know the name Ike the Crippler Shaw. Ike Shaw was the guy who owned the school, who was, you know, he was definitely wider than he was tall, a profoundly rotund human being who was given that name. He had like 3 matches in his entire life, all against the same person, one of the Hart brothers, right? Might have been like Bruce, not even like Brett or Owen or even, you know, Smitty. And they gave him the name as a rib on a guy by the name of Mike Shaw. Mike Shaw was a wrestler by the name of Bastion Booger. And Joe Frockledge was this guy's real name, and they gave him the name Ike Shaw as a rib, as a joke. So this is the part where you're going to probably hear a lot more wrestling vernacular in my talking as I describe my journey going through the world of professional wrestling going forward. I will try to break this stuff down for you so that you know what the words mean and not get too crazy with it. Ike Shaw was a guy who ran this business, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about him in future shows as well. But he was a guy who, if you were to look up the typical name or the typical meaning of the word carny, a shyster, snake oil, you know, salesman, one of those guys, you would see a picture of Ike Shaw right next to that definition. Now, it worked out really good for me because I had media connections, right? I had a show. I had a show that, you know, was able to give him some publicity, right, for his school. So in turn, I didn't pay for training. Worked out quite well. And then I just got over with the trainers, and, you know, that's what you do. But this is a gentleman who would try to sell shares. He'd get you to sign up to the school, or he'd give you free shares in the company, in a worthless company. You would dare not take the shares because it probably could also mean that you were liable for some of the debt that was owed out there from him ripping off lighting people, the production people, media people, news for buying ads on TV, not paying his bills. These were all things that were a real thing. And I'll tell you about the school maybe on the next episode of this. And we'll get into some of the characters that were also there. Ike Shaw would also try to sell you his patches. So he was such a large human being that he had these morphine patches, you know, for pain, right? The sheer pain of just being that large, so large that you had to take a bath in a hot tub and use a sheet as a towel because you couldn't find a towel that was big enough. But he would have these morphine patches, and he would have, you know, stick these things on like nicotine patches, so to speak, but they were morphine that were prescribed to him. And then after, you know, you'd have them on for a couple of days or whatever, you'd take them off. And then he would try to sell the used patches to people. You know, oh, there's still some in there. There's still some in there. You can get some out of there. This is the kind of human being, and there was many, many more human beings like this guy inside of the world of professional wrestling back then. The business has changed. It's changed a lot, and it's changed for the better. But back then, it was still, you know, very much the wild, wild west because people didn't know, right? Not enough people stood up or spoke out about what was really going on. Things like inside of the school, there was we had a tanning bed in there. You know, Joe thought it would be a very, very good idea to make sure that there was a camera set up into that part of the gym. Well, you can only imagine how well that worked out. And we'll get into those ones in the future. As for now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap this thing up because it is a Monday. Not a Sunday Tid Talk, but a Monday Tid Talk on this very special Canadian Harvest Thanksgiving No Pilgrims episode of Tid Talk. Thank you all for coming by. Thank you all for listening. Hit that like button. Share it out with your friends. You know how we do. It's always fun. I hope that everybody has a great rest of the day. If you are listening to this thing on Monday, you can also check out, we are going to be doing an episode of Marijuanderers tonight. And then following that, I am doing a show with the Jukebox Ginger himself at 10:15. So it is a busy, busy day. And then it's back to the grind once again. So, again, thank you all. I appreciate the hell out of every single one of you. Feel free to leave a comment. I would love to hear some of the comments about how, like, what are your special Thanksgiving things, right? What's a go-to meal for Thanksgiving or dish, right? I'm sure that a lot of people living inside of the country but have different roots have integrated some of their meals, right, into their Thanksgiving. If it's tacos, send me some. Till next time, when we see each other here, just remember I'm always going to be here. Have a great day.